We're going to start with a very, very special guest. There are think tanks, far too many of them. There are do tanks. And then there is the conservative mothership, the most influential think tank, not in America, but in the world. It is helmed by somebody who, well, let's just say, if I had 3 hours extra today, I could go through her whole CV, her whole resume. She was appointed by Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush. She worked for Governor George Allen of Virginia, ended up as director of the Office of Personnel and Management, and most important for me, because I was so reassured when I saw her face, she worked as a senior advisor on the presidential transition team for President Donald J. Trump. She is Kay Coles-James. Kay, welcome to America First.
Well, thank you. And you left out my most important credential of all.
And that is?
Friend of Seb and Katie.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, you've won points there. She is a friend of I am just the lesser Gorka. The boss is listening at home. I'm sure she will give me feedback, so let us not disappoint. Kay, as we invited you when you posted a very powerful, just 2-minute video on your Twitter feed, Kay Coles-James, and it has to do with something that sounds wonderful. It's the For the People Act, H.R. 1. Now, let me ask you, as an individual who grew up in a South that was going through the vicissitudes of integration, the consequences of the civil rights movement, can I ask you just one question about H.R. 1 to kick us off? This bill states the following: voter ID, the purges of ineligible voters on voter rolls, and restrictions on vote by mail are all forms of, and I'm quoting here, racial discrimination and systemic racism. Does any of this track with your experience of this bill?
I cannot tell you. It makes my head spin to even hear that. For those of your listeners who may not know, let me say, I am black. I was born in this country black. You know what that means? I grew up in the South. I understand racial discrimination when I see it. This is not that. I just find it abhorrent that they would play the race card to try to play on people's sympathy, Nobody in this country wants to deny anyone their right to vote for racial reasons. And I defy anyone to say that my objections or the objections of conservatives have anything to do with race. Our voter system right now, as it exists, and after what we just went through and what we saw, is in dire need of reform, but not this. Our founders knew what they were doing when they put these election laws and rules and gave that authority to the states. Do you know what the implications are if it's all centralized in Washington, D.C.?
Tell our millions of listeners, what would happen if, in contravention of the Constitution, the feds were in charge of our elections?
Oh, my word. It would be horrifying. First of all, they want to get rid of our First Amendment rights by restricting protected political speech and activity. The bill expands regulation and government censorship of campaigns. We don't need more of that. We need less of that. The bill basically guarantees inaccuracies in our voting registration rolls. You know, it increases opportunities for fraud at a time when most Americans really want a secure election protection. There's so much wrong with this bill, but what I want people to be aware of is you hear not just the race card being played, but you hear it oozing with compassion, oozing with, wonderful language about protecting and what this means for all Americans. Don't be duped by that. It is a power grab by the progressive left in order to control and centralize elections in this country. It's already passed the House. The Senate is going to be looking at this legislation sometime, maybe even as soon as a week, but perhaps, within the next month. I think all of us need to inform ourselves about what's in that bill, and then please, 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 make sure that the people you sent to Congress to represent you are representing your perspective.
So I have to ask the layman's question, as an individual who now runs the most important think tank, do tank there is, as an individual who has admirably served at every level of government, including the Reagan administration. Let me ask you, what could be, let's just hypothesize, what could be the motivations for these two stipulations of H.R. 1? Number one, agencies that register voters cannot require the records to be kept of anyone who refuses to affirm their American citizenship. And then secondly, states will be prohibited from requesting any form of identification from those who request an absentee ballot. Kay Coles-James, what is the reasonable objective for these restrictions?
There are no reasonable reasons that I could attach to that makes any sense whatsoever. It just seems to me that it's Katie bar the door. We want to get as many people registered as possible. And I think the thing that galls me more than anything, Seb, is the fact that the progressive left is doing exactly what they accuse us of doing. And they say we want to suppress the vote. I don't want to suppress anybody's vote. Too many of my relatives and friends fought and died to protect the right to vote. But I will not suppress a legal vote by having someone who is not legally allowed to vote in federal elections doing so and then canceling out my vote. This is something, I don't care if you're a liberal or a conservative, Republican or Democrat, all of us should want to have fair, legal elections and to make sure that once that election happens, people can feel that they have confidence in the results. When you have rules that say you can't ask for ID, when you have vote harvesting, when you have polling opening up weeks in advance, and then you have judges that are keeping them open longer than they should be, nobody has confidence in our system. Let's get back to common sense protections for everyone's legal right to vote.
We have a few seconds left. Let me ask you, Kay Coles-James, what is your sense in the Senate? Is this a done deal now that it's passed the House, or is there still hope?
I think there's still hope. I am confident that all of the Republicans will hold, and I am hopeful that there will be some Democrats who recognize how devastating this would be to our electoral process. And I hope that and pray that common sense prevails.